The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of the grand hall, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Ling adjusted the microphone stand for what felt like the 100th time that day, her small hands working with practiced efficiency. At 24, she had been a stagehand at the city's premier concert venue for just over 3 years, though most people who attended shows there would never have noticed her. 2 inches higher, called out Raj, the sound technician. Mr. Romanov is very particular about his microphone placement. Ling nodded and made the adjustment without complaint. Viktor Romanov, the internationally acclaimed pianist, was known as much for his brilliant performances as for his demanding nature. Tonight's charity fundraiser for children's music education was the biggest event of the season, with tickets selling for amounts that Ling couldn't imagine spending on anything, let alone a single evening's entertainment. "Perfect," Raj said, giving her a thumbs up before turning his attention back to the soundboard. Ling stepped back and surveyed the stage. The magnificent grand piano gleamed under the spotlights, its lid propped open like a giant black wing. She had helped polish it earlier that morning, carefully wiping away every fingerprint and speck of dust until she could see her reflection in its surface. Now it waited, silent and imposing, for the touch of a master. Behind the scenes, the venue buzzed with activity. Caterers rushed to set up elegant food stations in the reception area. Florists arranged stunning centerpieces on the tables where wealthy donors would sit after the performance. Volunteers placed programs on each seat, programs that prominently featured Viktor Romanov's photograph and impressive biography. "Ling, we need you backstage," called Diane, the event coordinator, her voice sharp with the stress of the impending event. Ling hurried through the side door and down the narrow hallway that led to the green room, where Diane stood with a clipboard, checking items off a seemingly endless list. Mr. Romanov's assistant just called. "They're running late but should arrive for sound check in about an hour. I need you to make sure everything in the green room is exactly as specified in his contract." Ling nodded and took the paper Diane thrust at her. The list was extensive and oddly specific. Bottled water at precisely 68 degrees Fahrenheit, 1 crystal bowl containing exactly 12 green grapes and another with unsalted almonds, white roses but no lilies, and a particular brand of hand sanitizer that had been special ordered from overseas. "And Ling," Diane added, barely looking up from her clipboard, "Mr. Romanov can be challenging. Just do whatever he asks without question, and we'll all get through this evening in one piece." This wasn't news to Ling. She had worked with enough famous performers to know that exceptional talent often came with exceptional demands. It didn't bother her. In fact, she took pride in her ability to anticipate needs and solve problems before they escalated. It was what made her good at her job, even if that job kept her firmly in the background. As she arranged the green room to Mr. Romanov's specifications, Ling couldn't help but glance at the beautiful piano in the corner. It wasn't as grand as the one on stage, but it was still a fine instrument. Her fingers itched to touch the keys, but she knew better than to risk being caught playing it. Music had been Ling's first love. Her father, a piano tuner, had taught her to play when she was barely tall enough to reach the keys. They couldn't afford lessons, but he brought home books from the clients who no longer wanted them, and together they had worked through them, page by page. When her father's eyesight began to fail, Ling became his assistant, learning to hear the subtle differences in tone that indicated a piano needed adjustment. After her father died, Ling had to abandon thoughts of music school. The job at the concert hall had been a practical choice. It paid the bills and kept her connected to music even if she wasn't making any herself. Sometimes when the hall was empty, she would sit at one of the pianos and play, losing herself in the music until someone inevitably walked in and she would jump up, pretending to be checking the instrument for dust. Satisfied with the green room, Ling returned to the stage where the technical team was running through lighting cues. The director of the charity, Helen Park, stood center stage, looking out at the empty seats with an expression of nervous anticipation. 300 guests confirmed, Helen said when she spotted Ling. "That's a record for us. If tonight goes well, we'll raise enough money to fund music programs in 5 additional schools." "It's going to be wonderful," Ling assured her, touched by Helen's obvious passion for the cause. Helen smiled gratefully. "Let's hope so. So many of these children would never have access to music education without these programs." She touched the piano reverently, Music changes lives. It certainly changed mine. Ling felt a connection with Helen in that moment, understanding completely what she meant. Music had a way of reaching inside you, of expressing things that couldn't be put into words. The moment was interrupted by the shrill ring of Helen's phone. Ling moved away to give her privacy, but couldn't help noticing how the color drained from Helen's face as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. "What do you mean, he can't perform?" Helen's voice rose in pitch. "The event starts in less than 3 hours." Everyone on stage froze. Raj stopped adjusting levels on his board. The lighting technician paused with his hand on a slider. Diane, who had just walked in with her clipboard, stopped mid-stride. "Food poisoning?" Helen was saying, her free hand pressed against her forehead. "Yes, I understand he physically can't." "No, of course we don't expect." "Yes, please convey our sympathies to Mr. Romanoff." When Helen ended the call, the silence in the hall was absolute. "Victor Romanoff has severe food poisoning," she announced, her voice hollow. "He's in the hospital. He won't be performing tonight. Can we postpone?" Diane asked, already flipping through her papers to check the venue's availability. Helen shook her head. "Many of our donors are flying out tomorrow morning, and the catering is already paid for. Non-refundable. We have to go ahead tonight. Without a performer?" Raj asked incredulously. "We'll have to find a replacement," Helen said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Someone local, someone who could step in on extremely short notice." "On a Friday night?" Diane scoffed. "Every professional musician in the city is already booked, and even if they weren't, who could prepare a program worthy of this audience in just a couple of hours?" The panic in the room was palpable. Ling could see careers and reputations flashing before everyone's eyes. More importantly, she could see the children who would lose their chance at music education if tonight's fundraiser failed. "I might have an idea," said Raj suddenly, looking thoughtful. "What about Professor Chen from the university? He's retired now, but he was quite renowned in his day." "I tried him already for next year's event," Helen replied. "He's in Taiwan visiting family." More names were suggested and dismissed for various reasons. Too far away, already performing elsewhere. Out of practice. Not enough draw for this caliber of donor. Ling stood quietly to the side, listening. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone must hear it. An idea had formed in her mind the moment Helen had announced Romanoff couldn't perform. But she had been pushing it away, telling herself it was ridiculous. She wasn't a professional. She hadn't performed for an audience since high school. She certainly wasn't in the same league as Victor Romanoff, and yet she knew his program. She had studied the pieces listed in tonight's program out of pure love for the music, playing them alone in the empty hall during her lunch breaks. Debussy's Clair de Lune, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She had been playing these pieces for years. What about the conservatory students? Someone suggested desperately. "On spring break," came the reply. The conversation was growing more frantic. Helen looked close to tears. Diane was making angry phone calls that weren't yielding results. Ling took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking, but her voice came out surprisingly steady when she finally spoke up. "I could do it." At first, no one seemed to hear her. She cleared her throat and said it again, louder this time. "I could perform the program." All eyes turned to her. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then several people spoke at once. "You?" Diane's voice was heavy with disbelief. "The stagehand?" Someone else muttered. Raj looked at her curiously. "You play piano, Ling?" Ling nodded, fighting the urge to shrink back from their stares. "I've been playing since I was 4. I know all the pieces in tonight's program." Helen studied her with a mixture of desperation and hope. "Have you performed professionally before?" "No," Ling admitted. "But I've played these pieces hundreds of times. I can do this." A ripple of doubtful murmurs spread through the group. Ling saw the disbelief in their eyes, the dismissal. She was just the quiet stagehand who moved equipment and ran errands. How could she possibly replace someone like Victor Romanoff? "Let's at least hear her play," Raj suggested, giving Ling an encouraging nod. Helen hesitated only briefly before gesturing to the piano. "Show us what you can do." Ling walked to the magnificent grand piano, feeling every step as if in a dream. She sat down on the bench, adjusted it to her height, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she was terrified, aware of all the skeptical eyes watching her. Then she began to play, and everything else fell away. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the concert hall, delicate as raindrops on still water. Ling's fingers moved across the keys with a gentle confidence that surprised even herself. She had played this piece countless times, but never on a piano this magnificent, never with an audience watching her every move. She didn't look up. She didn't need to see their faces to know what they were thinking. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the music flow through her, just as her father had taught her all those years ago. "Don't play the notes," he would say in his soft, accented English. "Let the notes play you." The piece grew, swelling like a wave that rises and falls, and Ling rode that wave, her body swaying slightly as her hands created the rippling arpeggios that made this composition so beloved. When the final notes faded into silence, she kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, afraid of what she might see when she opened them. "Well," said Helen, breaking the silence. "That was unexpected." Ling finally looked up. The director's expression had transformed from desperate worry to cautious hope. Raj was beaming. "I knew it. I've heard someone playing during lunch breaks when the hall was supposed to be empty. That was you, wasn't it?" Ling nodded, feeling her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "I'm sorry if I wasn't supposed to—" No, Helen interrupted. "That's not the issue right now. Can you play the rest of tonight's program just as well?" "Yes," Ling said without hesitation. "I know all of Romanov's pieces." "How?" Diane asked, her earlier skepticism now tempered with curiosity. Ling ran her fingers lightly over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make a sound. "My father was a piano tuner. I grew up around beautiful music and beautiful instruments. When Mr. Romanov's program was announced, I found the sheet music and practiced. I've always loved his selections." Helen and Diane exchanged glances. "Play something more challenging," Diane said. "The Chopin." Ling nodded and positioned her hands once more. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor was technically demanding, with its complex runs and dramatic shifts in tempo and dynamics. But it was also a piece she had played over and over, losing herself in its storytelling, its journey from gentle contemplation to passionate intensity. As she played, she forgot about the pressure of the situation. She forgot about the skeptical staff, the wealthy donors who would soon fill these seats, the desperate need to save the fundraiser. There was only the music speaking through her fingers, telling its timeless story. When the final chords thundered to their conclusion, Ling opened her eyes to find that more people had gathered to listen. The catering staff had paused their work. The florists stood with arrangements half completed in their hands. Even the security guards had come to see what was happening, and they were all staring at her with the same expression of astonishment. "I think we've found our performer," Helen said, her voice slightly unsteady. A bubble of nervous laughter escaped Ling's lips. "Really?" "Really," Helen confirmed with a nod. Not everyone looked convinced. Diane was biting her lip, eyes darting between Ling and Helen. "She's good," Diane admitted. "Very good, actually. But she's not Victor Romanov. The donors paid to see a world-renowned pianist, not a stagehand," Ling finished for her, the words stinging despite their truth. "It's not personal," Diane said quickly, "but these people have expectations. They're paying thousands of dollars per ticket. And they'll be even more disappointed if we cancel the performance entirely," Helen pointed out. "We don't have other options, Diane." The event coordinator sighed heavily. "Fine, but we need to make this work." She turned to Ling with narrowed eyes. "Do you own anything suitable to wear? Concert black? An evening gown?" Ling looked down at her plain black pants and sensible shoes, the uniform of someone meant to blend into the background. "No, nothing like that." Diane checked her watch. "We have just over 2 hours. That's barely enough time to get you ready." "I have a dress she could borrow," offered one of the younger volunteers, a woman named Zoe, who occasionally helped with ushering. "We look about the same size and I live just 10 minutes from here." "Good," Diane said. "Go now and bring shoes too." Zoe hurried off and Diane turned back to Ling with a determined expression. "We need to do something about your hair and makeup as well. And we'll need to reprint the programs." "No time for that," Helen said. "We'll make an announcement about the change. We'll say that Mr. Romanov is ill, and we're fortunate to have found a talented young pianist to step in at the last minute." Ling's head was spinning. Just an hour ago, she had been adjusting microphones and polishing the piano. Now she was going to play that piano in front of hundreds of people. I should practice, she said, suddenly worried that her skills might desert her when faced with a real audience. It was one thing to play for a small group of staff in an empty hall. It would be quite another to perform for a crowd of wealthy, discerning music lovers. Yes, Helen agreed. Take some time with the piano. Get comfortable with it. Diane and I will handle everything else. As the staff scattered to their various tasks energized by the new plan, Raj gave Ling a thumbs up. You're going to be great, he told her. I've heard you play before, remember? You have something special. His kindness nearly brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she managed to say before he too hurried off. Alone on the stage, Ling took a deep breath and looked out at the empty seats that would soon be filled. Fear gripped her for a moment. The kind of paralyzing fear that makes it impossible to move or think clearly. What if she made a mistake? What if she embarrassed herself? What if the audience laughed at her? To calm herself, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play scales, the most basic of exercises. The familiar movement soothed her nerves. She graduated to arpeggios, then to short passages from each piece in the program, refamiliarizing herself with how this particular piano responded to her touch. She was deep in concentration when Zoe returned. Breathless, clutching a garment bag. I brought a couple of options, she said, unzipping the bag to reveal 2 evening gowns. One was deep blue with subtle beading, the other a simpler design in rich burgundy. The blue one might be a bit flashy for a last-minute replacement, but the burgundy could work well. Ling touched the fabric of the burgundy dress. It was soft and elegant, nothing like anything she had ever worn before. I don't know how to thank you, she told Zoe. No need, the volunteer replied with a smile. Just play beautifully tonight. That's thanks enough. In the next whirlwind hour, Ling was transformed. The dress fit as if it had been made for her. A staff member who had once worked in theater makeup styled her hair into a simple but elegant updo and applied makeup that enhanced her features without looking overdone. When they showed her a mirror, she hardly recognized herself. Is that really me? She asked in wonder. It's you, confirmed Zoe. But it was always you. The dress just helps everyone else see it. Meanwhile, the hall had been prepared. The lights were dimmed in the audience area, while the stage glowed with a warm, inviting illumination. The piano waited majestic at center stage. People would be arriving soon. Diane appeared, clipboard in hand as always. 5 minutes until doors open, she announced. Helen will make a brief announcement about the change in performer before you begin. All you need to do is wait in the wings until she introduces you, then walk out, bow and play. Just like that, Ling said weakly. Diane's professional facade softened just a bit. Just like that, and remember to breathe. As Diane walked away, Ling heard the first murmurs of the arriving audience filtering in from the lobby. The reality of what was about to happen hit her with full force. In just a few minutes, she would walk onto that stage not as a stagehand, but as the featured performer. She made her way to the wings, carefully lifting the hem of her borrowed gown to avoid tripping. From her hiding place just off stage, she could see the hall gradually filling with people in expensive clothes, their jewelry catching the light as they found their seats. They chatted among themselves, unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind the scenes, unaware that the stagehand who had helped prepare the venue was now about to entertain them. Helen stepped onto the stage, elegant in a simple black dress, and approached the microphone. The audience gradually quieted. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Helen began. Welcome to our annual fundraiser for children's music education. We are deeply grateful for your support. She paused, and Ling could see her carefully choosing her next words. I must inform you of a change to tonight's program. Unfortunately, Mr. Victor Romanov is unable to perform this evening due to a sudden illness. A collective murmur of disappointment rippled through the audience. However, Helen continued, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the murmuring, we are extremely fortunate to have found a remarkably talented young pianist who has agreed to step in at the last moment. While she may not yet have the fame of Mr. Romanov, I can assure you that her skill and artistry are extraordinary. Ling's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Miss Ling Wei. This was it. This was her moment. Taking a deep breath, Ling stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The applause was polite but restrained as Ling walked across the stage. She could feel hundreds of eyes following her, curious and perhaps a little disappointed. These people had paid to see Viktor Romanov, a pianist whose name alone could fill concert halls around the world. Instead, they were getting a complete unknown, a stagehand in a borrowed dress. Ling kept her eyes on the piano, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other, without tripping on the unfamiliar long gown. When she reached the gleaming grand piano, she turned to face the audience and gave a small bow, just as she had seen countless performers do over the years. The spotlight was blinding. Beyond its glare, she could make out only the vague shapes of people in the first few rows, women in elegant evening wear, men in dark suits. Their expressions were hard to read, but she sensed skepticism hanging in the air. Taking a deep breath, Ling sat down on the piano bench and adjusted it slightly. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool, smooth ivory beneath her fingertips. For a moment she froze, suddenly aware of the enormity of what she was attempting. These people would judge her harshly. They would compare her to Romanov. They would find her lacking. In that terrible moment of doubt, Ling glanced toward the wings where she had stood so many times before, watching other performers. Helen was there, giving her an encouraging nod. Next to her stood Raj, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. And behind them, several of the venue staff had gathered to watch, their faces hopeful. They believed in her, even if the audience didn't. Not yet. Ling closed her eyes and remembered her father's words. Music isn't about the audience. It's about the conversation between you and the piano. Everything else will follow. She began to play. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floated out across the hall, tentative at first, then growing in confidence. Ling let the music wash over her, finding comfort in its familiar patterns. The piece was gentle and dreamy, creating an atmosphere of moonlit tranquility. It was the perfect beginning, allowing her to settle her nerves and find her rhythm. As the final notes faded into silence, there was a moment of stillness before the audience responded with applause, warmer this time but still reserved. Ling could almost hear their thoughts. Not bad, but let's see what else she can do. Without pausing for too long, she moved into the next piece, a Chopin nocturne that wasn't on Romanov's original program, but that flowed naturally from the Debussy. It was a risk to deviate from the expected selections, but Ling felt it was right. This was her performance now, not a pale imitation of what Romanov would have done. The nocturne built in intensity, allowing Ling to demonstrate more range and emotion. As she played, she began to forget her nervousness. The audience faded from her awareness, and there was only the music, the conversation between herself and the piano that her father had spoken of. When she finished the nocturne, the applause was stronger. She risked a glance at the audience and saw that people were leaning forward in their seats now, their expressions more attentive than skeptical. Encouraged, Ling launched into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, another piece from Romanov's planned program. The famous first movement, with its haunting triplets and melancholy melody, created a spell over the hall. Ling could feel the audience's energy changing, their initial disappointment giving way to genuine appreciation. But it was in the third movement, with its thundering octaves and lightning-fast runs, that Ling truly lost herself in the performance. Her fingers flew across the keys with a speed and precision born of countless hours of practice. The technical challenges that had once seemed so daunting now felt like old friends, familiar obstacles that she knew exactly how to overcome. When the final chords of the sonata crashed through the hall, the audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. Ling looked up, slightly dazed, to see several people on their feet. The transformation was beginning. They were no longer merely tolerating her as a replacement. They were responding to her on her own terms. As the applause continued, Ling spotted a movement in the corner of her eye. Diane was gesturing to her from the wings, pointing at her watch. A reminder that there was still the second half of the program to consider after the intermission. Ling nodded in understanding and stood to take a bow. As she did, a man in the front row who had been watching her with particular intensity suddenly smiled and nodded, as if confirming something to himself. There was respect in his eyes, the respect of one musician for another. She left the stage to sustained applause, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The moment she was out of sight of the audience, her knees nearly gave way beneath her. "You were amazing," Zoe whispered, appearing at her side to steady her. "They love you." "That was just the first half," Ling reminded her. trying not to let the initial success go to her head. There's still so much more to play. And you'll be just as wonderful, Zoe assured her. Better even, now that you know you can do it. In the green room where Viktor Romanov would have spent the intermission, Ling sat quietly, sipping water and flexing her fingers to keep them limber. Helen came in, beaming. The donors are talking about nothing but your performance, she reported. Nobody is asking for refunds. In fact, several people have already increased their pledges for the children's music program. Really? Ling couldn't quite believe it. Really, Helen confirmed. There's something about discovering new talent that makes people feel like they're part of something special. Like they're witnessing the beginning of an important story. Ling smiled, though her stomach was still in knots at the thought of returning to the stage for the second half. I'm glad it's helping the fundraiser. More than helping, Helen said. This might end up being our most successful event ever. She paused, studying Ling's face. Are you all right? You look pale. Just nervous about the second half, Ling admitted. The Chopin Ballade is the most challenging piece in the program. You played it beautifully during the rehearsal, Helen reminded her. That was different. The hall was empty then. Think of it this way, Helen suggested. An hour ago, these people had no idea who you were. Now they're sitting out there, eager to hear you play again. You've already won them over. The hard part is done. Before Ling could respond, there was a knock at the door. Diane poked her head in. 2 minutes until the end of intermission, she said. And there's something else. She stepped into the room, followed by a distinguished-looking older man in a tailored suit. This is Mr. Patterson, Diane explained. He's the director of the Symphony Foundation. He'd like a word with you, Ling. Ling stood up quickly, smoothing the borrowed gown with suddenly sweaty palms. The Symphony Foundation was one of the most prestigious musical organizations in the country. They provided scholarships to promising musicians and arranged performance opportunities with major orchestras. Miss Wei, Mr. Patterson said, extending his hand. Your performance of the Beethoven was extraordinary. Thank you, Ling said, shaking his hand and trying not to show her surprise at the compliment. I understand this was a last-minute arrangement, he continued, which makes your poise all the more impressive. Tell me, where did you study? Ling hesitated, embarrassed to admit the truth. I didn't, sir. Not formally. My father was a piano tuner. He taught me what he could, and I learned the rest on my own. Mr. Patterson's eyebrows rose. Self-taught? Remarkable. He studied her with increased interest. The foundation is always looking for exceptional talent that might otherwise go undiscovered. I'd like to speak with you after the performance about our young artist program. Thank you, Ling stammered, unable to fully process what he was suggesting. He smiled. Don't thank me yet. Play the second half as beautifully as you did the first, and then we'll talk. With a nod to Helen and Diane, he left the room. Ling stared after him, stunned. Did that just happen? She asked no one in particular. Helen laughed. It did. And it's just the beginning, I suspect. The bell chimed, signaling the end of intermission. Audience members would be returning to their seats. It was time for Ling to return to the stage. As she made her way back to the wings, she passed several of the venue's staff members who had gathered to watch. They nodded to her with newfound respect in their eyes. Even Diane, who had been the most doubtful about Ling's ability to replace Romanov, gave her an encouraging smile. The second half of the program is more challenging, Diane said. But after what I've seen, I have no doubt you're up to it. Coming from Diane, this was high praise indeed. Ling felt a surge of confidence as she waited for her cue to return to the stage. When she walked out this time, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. The audience welcomed her not as a disappointment or a curiosity, but as an artist they had come to appreciate. The skepticism that had hung in the air at the beginning of the evening had vanished. Ling took her place at the piano once more, her posture more relaxed, her movements more assured. She had proven herself in the first half. Now in the second, she would not just play the notes, she would make the music truly her own. The centerpiece of the second half was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that told a story through its shifting moods and technical demands. As Ling began to play, she thought of her own story, of the quiet stagehand who had watched from the shadows for years, learning and dreaming and waiting for a moment that she never truly believed would come. And now that moment was here, not as she had imagined it, not as she had planned it, but here nonetheless. The universe had handed her an unexpected gift, and she was determined to make the most of it. With that thought in her heart, Ling poured everything she had into the music, her fingers dancing across the keys with newfound freedom and joy. Tonight she was no longer invisible. Tonight she was being seen and heard. And tomorrow. Tomorrow was full of possibilities that had never seemed within her reach before. The Chopin ballade flowed from Ling's fingers like water finding its natural path. Where earlier she had played with careful precision, now she played with freedom, letting the music breathe and speak in her own voice. The piece told a story, from its gentle, questioning opening to its thunderous, passionate conclusion, and Ling felt as though she were telling her own story along with it. In the audience, people leaned forward in their seats, captivated. A woman in the third row closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. An elderly man nodded in time with the music, his expression one of deep appreciation. Even the younger members of the audience, who might normally fidget during classical performances, sat perfectly still, caught in the spell Ling was weaving. When she reached the technically demanding coda, with its cascading notes and dramatic octaves, Ling didn't think about the difficulty. She didn't worry about making a mistake. She simply let her hands do what they had been trained to do through countless hours of practice, while her heart guided the interpretation. As the final chords resonated through the hall, there was a moment of breathless silence, that magical pause between the end of a truly moving performance and the audience's reaction. Then the applause began, not polite or restrained as it had been at the start of the evening, but enthusiastic, heartfelt. People rose to their feet, their faces alight with the joy that comes from witnessing something unexpected and wonderful. Ling stood and bowed, her cheeks flushed with exertion and emotion. She looked out at the standing ovation, her first ever, and felt a surge of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Behind her, a small sound caught her attention. She turned to see Raj approaching from the wings, carrying a bouquet of white roses, the very ones that had been intended for Viktor Romanov. He handed them to her with a proud smile, and she accepted them with trembling hands. The applause continued, washing over her in waves. She took another bow, deeper this time, trying to express her thanks for their acceptance, for their willingness to take a chance on an unknown. As the applause finally began to subside, Ling returned to the piano for her final piece, a listitude that would showcase her technical abilities one last time. But before she began, she made a decision. Setting aside the planned program, she instead played a piece her father had taught her, a traditional folk melody that he had arranged for piano. It was simpler than the other works she had performed, but it came from her heart. A tribute to the man who had first placed her hands on a keyboard and shown her the magic that those keys could create. The sweet, nostalgic melody filled the hall, creating an intimate connection between Ling and her audience. She could almost feel her father's presence beside her, his gentle hands guiding hers as they had when she was small. When the piece ended, the silence was profound, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then slowly the applause began again, building once more into a standing ovation that seemed to lift the roof of the concert hall. Helen appeared at the edge of the stage, beaming with pride and relief. She walked to center stage and stood beside Ling, waiting for the applause to quiet enough for her to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helen said when she could finally be heard, "I think we can all agree that we have witnessed something extraordinary tonight. While we were disappointed to learn that Mr. Romanov could not be with us, I believe we have been privileged to discover a remarkable new talent." The audience applauded in agreement, and someone near the back of the hall shouted, "Bravo! Miss Wei has never performed professionally before tonight," Helen continued, and a murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. "Until a few hours ago, she was working behind the scenes as a member of our venue staff." Ling blushed as the audience's attention intensified, with people turning to their neighbors in astonishment, whispering behind their programs. "I think we can all agree that she belongs on this stage," Helen concluded, "and I hope we will have the privilege of hearing her play again in the future." More applause followed, along with calls for an encore. Ling looked to Helen, uncertain what to do. She hadn't prepared an encore. The thought hadn't even crossed her mind. "Play something else," Helen whispered. "Anything you like." Ling nodded and returned to the piano one last time. For her encore, she chose a piece she had composed herself during lonely evenings in her small apartment. A simple, heartfelt melody that had never been played for anyone else. When she finished, the applause was deafening. Ling took her final bow of the evening, clutching the roses Raj had given her, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric. Staff members who had barely acknowledged her presence before now crowded around to offer congratulations. Diane, clipboard still in hand, gave her a quick, fierce hug. "I've never been so happy to be wrong," she admitted with a laugh. "You were spectacular." Raj was beaming with pride as if he had personally discovered her. "I told you," he kept saying to anyone who would listen. "I always knew she had something special." But it was Helen who seemed most affected by the evening's success. The worry lines that had creased her forehead when Romanov canceled had vanished, replaced by an expression of pure joy. "The pledges are still coming in," she told Ling, showing her the tablet where donation amounts were being tallied in real time. "We've already exceeded last year's total by 30%. The music program will be able to expand to all 5 schools and add a 6th. Ling stared at the numbers in amazement. "All because of a last-minute replacement?" "All because of you," Helen corrected gently. "Your talent and your courage tonight have inspired people. That's what music at its best can do. It reminds us of our capacity for beauty and excellence. It brings us together." Mr. Patterson from the Symphony Foundation appeared at Helen's elbow, his eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Wei," he said, extending his hand again. "As promised, I'd like to discuss the Foundation's Young Artist program with you." Ling shook his hand, still dazed by the evening's events. "I'm honored, sir, but I'm not sure I qualify. I don't have formal training or a music degree. The foundation exists to support exceptional talent," he replied. "Formal credentials are secondary to ability and potential. And you, my dear, have both in abundance." He handed her a business card. "Call my office tomorrow. We'll set up a proper audition. Though after tonight's performance, it's really just a formality. I believe we can offer you a scholarship to complete your education at the conservatory, along with performance opportunities to help establish your career." Ling accepted the card with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to find other words. Mr. Patterson smiled. "Music finds its way," he said simply, before moving away to speak with Helen about the Foundation's support for the children's program. As the backstage area gradually emptied, with staff returning to their duties and donors making their way to the reception, Ling found a quiet corner to catch her breath. She still wore the borrowed gown, still held the bouquet of roses, but everything else in her life had changed in the span of a few hours. Zoe found her there, sitting quietly amid the backstage equipment that had been her domain for so long. "There you are," she said. "Everyone's looking for you. You're the guest of honor at the reception now." "I just needed a minute," Ling explained. "It's all happening so fast." Zoe nodded in understanding and sat beside her. "It's a lot to take in." "How do you feel?" Ling considered the question. "Grateful," she said finally. "And a little scared." "Scared? After what you just did out there?" "That's why I'm scared. What if it was just luck? What if I can't do it again?" Zoe shook her head firmly. "That wasn't luck. That was years of preparation meeting opportunity, and from what I heard, you'll have plenty of chances to do it again." Ling fingered the business card Mr. Patterson had given her. "It seems impossible. This morning I was just a stagehand. Tonight you became who you were always meant to be," Zoe finished for her. "The rest is just details." From the reception hall, the sound of conversation and laughter drifted backstage. People would be waiting to meet her, to congratulate her, perhaps to offer her more opportunities. The thought was overwhelming. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," Ling admitted. Zoe stood and offered her hand. "You weren't ready to replace Viktor Romanov with 2 hours' notice either, but you did it anyway. Sometimes we don't know what we're capable of until we're pushed beyond what we thought were our limits." Ling took a deep breath and accepted Zoe's hand, allowing herself to be pulled to her feet. "You're right, and I owe it to my father to see where this leads. He always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Together, they walked toward the reception, toward the future that had opened up so unexpectedly. As they approached the doors to the grand foyer, the buzz of conversation grew louder. Ling paused for just a moment, gathering her courage. "Ready?" Zoe asked. Ling nodded. "Ready." They pushed open the doors and the crowd turned as one to greet the evening's unexpected star. Faces lit up with recognition, and a spontaneous round of applause broke out. People pressed forward, eager to meet the young woman who had so moved them with her music. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and appreciation, Ling finally allowed herself to believe that perhaps her life had been leading to this all along. Perhaps this wasn't just a strange twist of fate, but the beginning of the path she was meant to walk. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward to greet her new future. 1 year later, Ling stood in the wings of the same concert hall, her heart racing with familiar pre-performance jitters. The venue was sold out, not for Viktor Romanov or any other established pianist, but for her. She smoothed the fabric of her gown, her own this time, a gift from Helen after Ling's third professional performance. The deep green silk complemented her complexion and moved beautifully when she played, catching the stage lights in a way that seemed to reflect the music itself. 5 minutes. Miss Wei, whispered the stagehand who had taken over many of Ling's former duties. Ling nodded, smiling at the young woman. Thank you, Tanya. She peered out at the audience filling the seats. So much had changed in a year. The morning after that fateful night when she had stepped in for Romanov, videos of her performance captured on phones despite the venue's request to refrain from recording had appeared online. Within days, they had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. Mr. Patterson had kept his word. The Symphony Foundation had offered her not only a scholarship, but also a stipend that allowed her to quit her job at the concert hall and focus entirely on her music. She had spent 6 intense months studying with masters at the conservatory, absorbing in half a year what many students took 4 years to learn. Then had come her first official concert, a short recital at a small venue, but still a professional engagement with her name on the program. Reviews had been enthusiastic, praising her technical skill and emotional depth. More invitations had followed, each venue slightly larger, each audience more eager to hear the young woman who had gone from stagehand to star in a single evening. And now she was back where it had all begun. No longer an emergency replacement, but the featured artist of the annual fundraiser for children's music education. The program listed her name in elegant script, Piano Recital by Ling Wei. Nervous? Asked a familiar voice. Ling turned to see Raj, now the head of sound engineering for the venue. Always, she admitted with a small laugh. No matter how many times I do this, there's always that moment of terror just before walking out there. You'll be wonderful, he assured her. You always are. A gentle hand touched her shoulder and Ling turned to find Helen standing behind her, elegant as ever in her role as director of the charity. Ready? Helen asked with a warm smile. As I'll ever be, Ling replied. Helen squeezed her shoulder. The children from the program are here tonight. Front row, center section. They've been looking forward to this for weeks. Ling's nerves calmed slightly at this news. The children's music program had expanded dramatically over the past year, thanks in part to her involvement as both performer and occasional teacher. Whenever her schedule allowed, she visited the schools to work with the young students, remembering her own childhood longing for proper instruction. I added something special for them, Ling confided. A piece I composed based on some of the melodies they've been working on. Helen's eyes lit up. They'll be thrilled. The house lights dimmed, signaling it was time to begin. Helen squeezed Ling's hand once more before hurrying to the stage to make her introduction. As Ling listened to Helen's words, she thought back to that night a year ago. How terrified she had been, how certain that she would fail, how surprised by the audience's response. Tonight she still felt nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness, tempered by experience and confidence. Ladies and gentlemen, Helen was saying, it is my great pleasure to welcome back to our stage a remarkable young artist who has, in just 1 year, captured the hearts of music lovers around the country. Her story is an inspiration to all of us, but especially to the children in our music program, who see in her the living proof that dedication and talent can open doors that once seemed firmly closed. Applause began to build as Helen continued. She has generously donated her time tonight to support our expanded children's music program, which now serves over 300 students in 7 schools across the city. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Miss Ling Wei. The applause swelled as Ling walked onto the stage, her steps confident now, her smile genuine. She bowed deeply, acknowledging the warm welcome, then took her place at the piano, the same magnificent instrument she had played a year ago, though now it felt like an old friend rather than an intimidating stranger. As she began her program with a Bach prelude, Ling felt a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The notes flowed effortlessly, her technique honed by months of intensive study, her interpretation deepened by the experiences of the past year. From her seat at the piano, she could see the children from the music program in the front row, their eyes wide with wonder. Some of them she recognized from her teaching visits. A boy who struggled with rhythm but had perfect pitch, a girl whose small hands couldn't yet span an octave, but who played with remarkable sensitivity. They watched her with unabashed admiration, perhaps seeing in her their own potential futures. Behind them sat donors and music lovers, many of whom had been present at her debut performance. They had returned to witness the continuing evolution of the talent they had helped to discover. And in a seat near the back, partially hidden in shadow, sat an elderly man with a worn face and calloused hands, a piano tuner from across the city, who had read about Ling in the newspaper and recognized in her story echoes of his own daughter's journey. He had come tonight not just to hear beautiful music, but to witness a kind of redemption, a validation of the sacrifices made by people like himself who gave their children the gift of music without knowing where it might lead. Ling didn't know he was there, wouldn't learn of his presence until after the performance, when he would approach her with tears in his eyes and tell her how much her playing had moved him. But somehow as she played, she felt connected to everyone in the hall, to the children and their dreams, to the donors and their generosity, to the unseen piano tuner and his quiet pride. When she reached the midpoint of her program, Ling paused to address the audience directly. "A year ago, I stood on this stage for the first time, terrified and uncertain," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I had spent years watching other performers from the wings, never imagining that I would one day be in their place." She looked out at the sea of attentive faces. "What happened that night changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. But more importantly, it taught me something that I try to share with every student I meet, that sometimes our greatest limitations are the ones we place on ourselves." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. "Tonight, I want to play something special for the children of the music program," Ling continued. "This is a new composition, based on melodies they created during our workshops together. It's called First Steps." As she began to play, a video screen lowered silently behind her, displaying images of the children in their music classes, learning, practicing, performing in small recitals at their schools. The audience watched, charmed by the earnest faces of young musicians at the beginning of their journeys. Ling's composition was simple yet moving, capturing both the hesitancy of beginners and the joy of discovery. When she finished, the children in the front row burst into spontaneous applause, some of them bouncing in their seats with excitement at hearing their own melodies transformed into something so beautiful. The rest of the program passed in a blur of music and emotion. Ling played pieces that showcased her technical growth over the past year, but also works that spoke to her personal journey, from Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, with its struggle between darkness and light, to Rachmaninoff's Transcendent Prelude in G major, a piece that seemed to speak of transformation and new beginnings. For her final scheduled piece, she chose the same folk melody,